Good morning and welcome to day 5 of the Global Family Business Summit 2021. I am delighted this morning to be joined by Rob Gray from Squad, who works exclusively with a number of family businesses in terms of developing their brand, their heritage story, and turning it into a piece of collateral that really demonstrates what they do and makes the most of their journey. Rob, I'm going to hand over to you to do an introduction, introduce yourself and your role, but then obviously let's take this forward and make it interactive. And I've got lots of questions for you as we go. So Rob, over to you.
Cool, sounds good. Thank you, Paul. So, bear with me. Hopefully you can all see the slides. Shout if not, or if there's any problems with audio as we go through. We've got some video in here, so if there are any issues, put your hands up and we'll try and sort those. But as Paul says, today I want to talk to you about building brand positions. Really, that's what we do as a business at Squad. Is we help clients build positions for their brands. We help them find a place in the world where they can stand out and be distinctive. We find that's very important in terms of powering their growth, because if you stand out and you're different in the market and in the world and you're distinctive, then customers are more drawn to you, employees and talent are more drawn to you, they'll seek you out, people are more loyal to a business that's different and distinctive, and they're willing to pay more to work with that business. So we find helping clients find that position and build that position is really important. That's at Squad. That's what we do as a business, and we help clients do that in two ways: through our strategic skills to help them find and articulate that position, but also our creative skills in advertising, branding, and those kind of areas to help bring those positions to life. And as Paul says, we work with quite a few family businesses, which are always really interesting, great brands to work with and go on this journey with, because generally there is often something really interesting that they stand for or they're about as an ethos that you can start to build a position around. So you're generally not having to kind of invent too much. There's some real kind of gold dust in the business that you can work with. So today I'm going to share a few examples of family businesses we've worked with and kind of just go behind the scenes of those stories and show you kind of not just the work that came out of it, but how we got there and the thinking that went into it. And hopefully that's useful in terms of you being able to think about your own businesses, and how some of this could kind of work for you. So as Paul said, I've got 3 to talk through, so I'll talk through each one in turn, and then we can pause for questions, and have a bit of discussion around each one to kind of draw out anything in particular that people want to get out of this or find out more about. So just to give you a kind of overview of kind of how we go about this, in terms of a process and kind of building those brand positions. It starts with finding what the brand of the business wants to stand for, what it's all about, what its ethos is, and then helping those businesses push that out across their branding and their identity, across their culture and behaviors and the service within the business, across their advertising, promotion, communications, and across their customer experience, whether that's packaging or stores or websites, however that kind of customer experience is delivered. So I'm going to talk you through the process we use to do this, and I'll use kind of three examples of family business. We call this the process we use, the Rocket Launch program, because of that kind of potential for this to create real energy and momentum inside the businesses. As you start to kind of build a position and energize people around it, you get a real sense of kind of lift off and momentum. So the first example I'm going to talk about is a business called JW Lee's, who are a pub and brewery business from Manchester originally. They're a 6th generation family business, about 190 years old now. We started working with them about 6 years ago. with William Lees Jones, who's a member of the 6th generation and managing director of the business. And he'd come to us and kind of said, look, this is kind of where we are at the moment. This is how we look. This is how our beers look. And you can see some pictures there of how they looked as a brand. And he just felt they had a real opportunity to overhaul the brand, give it a new kind of sense of direction, stand for something more distinctive in the market, and just become generally more modern, less kind of traditional. They were starting to look and feel like a kind of 6th generation family business, and that wasn't what he wanted for the future. He wanted to kind of overhaul it and revamp it and build a really kind of strong, vibrant, modern brand. So the way we do this, the way we think about it, and the kind of building blocks of starting to think about brand position are really about what is the offer and what is the audience, and making sure you really clearly define those two things: what your business offers to the world and who its audience is. So if you take JDB Lees as an example, their audience wasn't massively different to many other pubs within they've got 100 odd pubs, 150, I think, near 150 pubs across the northwest. Each of those competes in a local village or a town or a city or a high street against other pubs, so competing for a similar audience. But what distinguishes their offer from other brewery, pub and brewery chains is they still brew their own beer. They are one of a shrinking number of independent family brewers who still brew their own beer. If you look at people like Fuller's and Young's in London, you go into their pubs and the beer might be branded Fuller's and Young's, but it's not their brewery anymore. They've sold the brewery. So JW Lees are very fiercely protective of still brewing beer and very passionate about that brewery and keeping that brewery alive. So that was the thing we latched onto in terms of what made their business different. And that was kind of the building blocks of starting to build a position around. But it's then about articulating that in terms of a kind of really succinct, compelling thought around what is the purpose of this business, what is this brand, why does it exist, what's its reason in the world. And the way we do that is use this kind of technique of starting to think, well, that's the offer, great, but what's the real passion? Why are people in the business passionate about delivering that offer? And then look at the audience and think, what is the audience? What do they really desire? And if you find that kind of thing in the middle that connects the two, the thing that the business is passionate about and the thing the audience really desires, that's the basis that you can start to build your purpose around. That's the reason you exist. It's why you and your audience kind of connect and come together. So for JW Lees, what we observed was actually there was a real interest in beer, a real change in the market over the last 10 or so years with the emergence of craft brewers and people like Brewdog, and then all the people that have come after them. So there's been this from something that was kind of, cask ale was kind of old and traditional and kind of dying a death in the 80s, and smooth and all this, John Smith's and all that stuff was kind of coming in. And actually there was a real change and kind of interest in craft beer, artisan craft produced beers again, and that presented a real opportunity for JW Lees because they've got this brewery. They are the original craft brewer. They've been doing it for 190 years in the kind of traditional, authentic way, and they're really, what you find in the business is a real kind of passion for preserving that and keeping that tradition alive for the next 190 years. So that was the opportunity to connect to them with their audience in terms of this interest and passion around the beer and the brewing. So the phrase we kind of articulated to summarize that was keeping the brewery at the heart of JW Lees. And then this next stage is kind of quite a crucial stage in terms of making that transition from, okay, we've got that idea for what the brand stands for that we can start to build a position around, but how are we going to bring that to life? How are we going to articulate that in a really compelling, interesting, emotive, arresting, engaging way to our audience that's going to get them excited and engaged in the business? And I often use this kind of visual to show that difference between the same kind of thought articulated in a very straight strategic way and then articulated in a creative, interesting way. You know, one hitchhiker with a sign saying to Manchester, another with a sign saying to Mums for Christmas. You know, the one on the right is the one in, you know, they're both saying the same thing in essence, but the one on the right is the one you're more likely to notice, you're more likely to connect with, and you're probably more likely to stop for. So that's kind of the jump we seek to make at this kind of stage of the process. So we articulated this phrase to guide us for JW Lees, which was about modern traditional brewer. So it's about the brewery, keeping that at the heart of the business. It was about preserving their fantastic tradition and heritage. You know, they've got amazing history. You know, they've been in Coronation Street, an amazing wood panelled boardroom where Winston Churchill's dined, with a Lowry sketch of the brewery hanging on the wall. You know, so fantastic stories and history and heritage, but it needed to also be about the future and about being modern and progressive and looking forward as well as back. So that was the kind of focal point in terms of the story we looked to tell for JW Lees. And then one of the things we often do in these type of projects is create a film, because a brand film is a great way to articulate that, tell that story better than anyone ever could in a presentation or a PowerPoint or anything like that. So we make a film that they can then start to use internally with their teams and their staff and in inductions and recruitment and training to say, this is what we're all about as a brand and a business, this is what we stand for. And they can also use it externally with customers and suppliers to talk about, this is our ethos, this is what we stand for. So I'm going to play this film, which will hopefully work. If you can't hear anything shortly, then do shout.
We are born of a time when beer was beer, when workers grafted under skies unclear. The good John Lees of strong intention, a pioneer, a man of invention. He brewed his beer for greater good, for workers toiling sweat and blood. We've passed this craft from year to year, from father to son to grandchildren dear, never losing sight of who we are, of what got us here. Northern Star. A restless spirit, a thirst for our craft, cask ales fermented, served on draught. 200 years so far apart, yet joined by beers and a timeless art. A traditional craft, a modern take, another brew we are yet to make. But beer alone is not it all. It needs a home, a welcome, walls, a timeless union of pint and pub, of clank and chatter, banter and grub. As skies have cleared, change has blown. The choice of drinks and times has grown. Lagers, cocktails, bubbles, wines, a place to meet, to work, to dine. But still one thing remains the same, beyond the JW Lees good name. The special atmosphere that makes us tick, beyond the drinks, the food, the bricks. Family business is a funny thing. Through heavy times with leaden wings, stick together is what we do. We stick it out, we see it through. To brew good times and endless quest, to do things right, to never rest. To future generations we do turn, for their respect we look to earn, so they may toast us with a pint of beer. Let's raise a glass to the next 200 years.
So kind of having created that definition of the position we wanted to build. It's then about kind of how do we start to push that out across all these areas: branding, communications, customer experience, culture. So started with kind of communicating that internally. So this is William on stage at a full kind of company conference, launching this new direction, this new vision, playing the video and talking about what it would mean for the business and what they were going to do to kind of align around it. Changed all the branding, so rebranding them and giving them flex across the identity, so that some beers, like their bitter that they've brewed since day one, 190 years ago, looks more traditional, but then they can also be much more innovative and progressive with some of the other designs like MPA, which is a much more modern beer. These are some examples of then how that kind of starts to roll out and get applied across the business. And again, flexing from something more traditional to something much more modern like this, which was a collaboration brew with a craft, with a modern craft brewer called Northern Monk. And then kind of extending that into innovation. So, if this kind of position is all about putting the brewery at the heart, then that meant being innovative and progressive in terms of the beers they brewed. So they started to look a lot more at lager. They traditionally focused very much on ale and had a much more extensive ale range than they did a lager range. But the lager market's a big market. They're selling a lot of third-party brands like Peroni, San Miguel, and these kind of things. So they wanted to create a premium lager of their own. So we positioned that around Manchester provenance and Manchester craft lager to go up against the foreign provenance brands. And that was their fastest ever selling beer. Became their fourth biggest beer within 12 months. Collaboration brews with people like Brian Cox. We then kind of carried on pushing that further. And one of the things they decided was, well, if we're really going to embrace this, then we should have a microbrewery, because that will allow us to be a lot more experimental. In a big brewery, you have to brew in big batches, so therefore you've got to kind of be able to sell a lot of whatever you brew. Whereas with a microbrewery, you can brew in small batches, so you can be much more experimental and do things that kind of have niche audiences. So we developed this kind of sub-brand, the Boiler House, which was to be the microbrewery, and they started brewing much more experimental and interesting beers to go alongside their existing range. And then took that out into the pubs and applied that to the design of the pubs and the interior design of the pubs and the experience inside the pubs. So we wanted to make those feel much more like a pub with its own brewery, almost like a microbrewery, so that when you were in those pubs, you really got a sense of this is a proper pub with its own brewery, and create that connection between the brewery and the pub, which has been there for 190 years. Keep that alive. So before I go on to the next one, should we pause there, Paul, and see if there's any questions?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic story, isn't it? 200 years of beer, and how you then kind of taken it and stretched it and remolded it into something that's forward-looking. How important, Rob, is the story? So that is it easier because you've got a 200-year-old business and there's lots of history and stories and provenance and all that type of stuff, or does it not matter? How do you stretch that family story into the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to some extent it's easier when you've got all that kind of tradition and heritage to play with, but there are lots of kind of interesting new brands who don't necessarily have that, so it's not always the case. But yeah, it is a lot easier when there's kind of all that that history and heritage to play with. I think that the trick is how you find the underlying narrative in it all, that allows you to tell a future-facing story, as well as you don't want everything to be a story of the history and the heritage and the past, because ultimately this is about the future, and it's always about, what can I buy from you today, and what's the vision for future generations. So it's finding the narrative that weaves the past with the future, and then building the story around that, I think, is is the key thing.
And there were some fantastic quotes, or the narrative, slightly difficult to hear in some places, but the narrative and the story in the kind of the northern tone and the kind of the references back to the past, but whilst looking forward, I thought were really clever.
Yeah.
But you'd expect me to say that because obviously you've done it. You want me to say it was really clever.
Thanks, Paul.
How do you drag those? I guess how do you drag those stories? What was the process kind of you went through in terms of how did you articulate, or you articulated them well, but how did you capture them in the first place? Was it talking to people? Were you going back to Arca? How did you capture the essence of what JW Lees was to build that brand profile?
It's about just spending a lot of time in the business to start with, to really understand it. So, you know, across every aspect. So we do things like, you know, we'll go and speak to all the key people. So, you know, at the family level, the ownership level, but also, you know, people working in the pubs doing Saturday jobs, and you know, across the business. You know, we'll kind of, you know, sit in the pubs, you know, which is one of the perks of doing this for a brewery, and just kind of, you know, get a sense of it, you know, hear from customers, you know, what are they saying, you know, what are they buying into, you know, look at all the data as well, you know, go through all the strategy decks and the financial analysis and all that stuff, you know, as well as the archives, you know, and rooting around in. They've got some amazing lofts in the brewery at JW Lees. You know, there's all kinds of history and memorabilia in there, and you know, so going on tours of the brewery, and just, you know, you just want to absorb as much as you can, and then kind of try and pull back from that. You know, a lot of what we do is about helping kind of clients see the wood for the trees. You know, so it's about, you know, they're so close to it, you know, in a family business, they've been brought up with it all their lives, you know, so it's very hard to just stand back and put your finger on that thing that says this is what it's all about. It's like being a journalist, you know, trying to root through all the facts and information to find the kind of nub of the story, and then tell that story.
And there was obviously a lot to go with there, but you've kind of encapsulated it really well. I'm keen to look at the next one, because I know the JW story really well, and it's really easy to fall into asking questions that relate to something that I know. So let's look at the second example, and then I've got some questions, but I think they might be better asked when there's a couple of examples for you to draw from. Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so this one is some work for a business called the Westmoreland Family, who operate, amongst other things, tea-based services on the M6 in Cumbria and Gloucester services on the M5 in Gloucestershire. We started working with them a number of years ago when they were about to embark on Gloucester services. So at that point, their main business was tea-based services. The business was in transition between the first generation, John Dunning, and his daughter Sarah Dunning, who was taking over as head of the business. And the history of the business was that it was started by John, whose family were hill farmers, and he was kind of brought up as a hill farmer on the Howgills up in Cumbria, and they built the motorway up there in the 70s, and it went through a corner of his land, so that land was compulsory purchased for the motorway and earmarked to have a motorway service area on it. And all the kind of big operators, Welcome Break and Road Chef and Motto, and these people thought, there'll never be enough traffic up there to justify motorway service areas, so they put in really low bids for it. So John just decided to put a bid in, and he won. So then he kind of set about building a motorway service area in the only way he knew how, which was kind of as a farmer, building buildings like he built barns and farm buildings, selling produce from the farm. So, you know, selling the lamb as hot pot, and also selling it as meat in their butchery. So they built that business up over the next 40 years, and then they got to a point where there was an opportunity to do Gloucester services. It's very it's very hard to find expansion opportunities as a motorway service area business because there's very tight controls around where and how frequently you're allowed them on the motorway network. So there's only a handful of places you could ever build one, and even then, if you find somewhere where in theory you could, you've then got all the problems of the planning permission and whether you could actually buy the land and everything else. So they managed this in Gloucestershire, and then they kind of had to set about thinking about, okay, well, what we're going to do with this? What we're going to call it? What's the experience going to be like? What we're going to sell? And they were going through lots of these kind of questions. What to call it was a big one, because T-Bay Services was famous, but that name is linked with the place, so they couldn't call it T-Bay Services. No one really knew so much of Westmoreland because although that was the holding company, it was much more in the background. T-Bay Services was the thing that was famous. And you have to kind of name it quite early because of the highways regulations. You have to tell the highways agency very early on in the process what you want on the motorway signage, because they have to have a long lead time on this. But other things as well, like what do we do with the produce? Do we ship produce down from the farm and offer a taste of Cumbria down in Gloucestershire? What do we do there? That in itself was a challenge because the farm wouldn't necessarily have capacity to deal with that. So we kind of sat down with them and said, we need to articulate what your brand stands for, and we need to align on that, because then that will give us a kind of a true north for starting to answer some of these questions and know what to do with them. So again, similar thing to JW Leeds. We went up there, we spent time in the business, went out with John and the crack of dawn on the farm, and they've got a hotel up there where we stayed, and just spent time speaking to them and absorbing it. And much like JW Leeds, I won't go through the kind of the model again, but similar kind of process of thinking. And what that led us to was this idea of places rooted in place. That what they do is create places that give you a taste of the place you're passing through. If you go to Watford Gap or Keele or wherever, it's pretty much identical. There's tarmac, there's a big building from the 70s or 80s in the corner with a Costa and a Smith's and a Burger King. And there's no sense of the place you're passing through. You could be passing through Watford Gap or you could be passing through Keele. You just wouldn't know. Whereas when you stop at T-Bay, you could only ever be in that place. You're eating produce from the fields that you can see. There's things to buy made by the community. You're looking out at the Howgills. You sat in buildings that architecturally reflect the area. So it has a fantastic sense of place. So it's all about places rooted in place. And so again, similar kind of journey, trying to capture that in a film. So this was the film we made.
There's a saying that sums up the resourcefulness of a hill farmer in this part of the world. It's a bare hill new Kilganawa without Trinton summit. And that means it's a bare hillside you'll cross over, on which you won't find something you'd make use of or make a living out of. When the motorway was first moved it, I was still a child. I remember seeing the pegs across the moor as to where the motorway might go. By the time they came to build it, I was 30. They wanted to put a small motorway service area here on our land, because the big operators had thought the proposed full motorway service area was not viable here. So we discussed it, and we thought we'd have a go. And so we did. We made the food we offered ourselves and obtained the products locally as far as we could. When you live in an area with many craft products, you want to market those because they're part of the culture of the area. So those core values were part of the business from the word go. most important thing about our businesses is that they're rooted in their place. So Gloucester is a completely new challenge in a different area, but it's an extension of the same idea. It's been enormous fun, tremendous fun. It's been great, and some great people, really great people. We've been very, very lucky.
So then, kind of having got that, it's about how do we start to push that out across the business and all the touch points, and starting again with the kind of cultural side and the internal side. So we actually helped them define 5 core beliefs that made up what sense of place meant and what it was all about, which then gave them a focus internally for their kind of cultural development and HR and people side in terms of the kind of values and behaviours they wanted to instill in the business. Started to look at the rebranding externally of them. So the identity was inspired by road signage, which is the language at place. So this was how the new branding looked. And actually, interestingly, when it then came to the question of what do we call Gloucester Services, well, it could only be called Gloucester Services because it was about that sense of place. So it had to be reflective of the place. And so that kind of these type of questions started to resolve themselves quite easily once they had that kind of focus of this is what we're all about. But the branding, although they had different names, the branding created a synergy and a family feel across the business, so that if you stopped at TB or Gloucester, you would know that these businesses are connected, they're part of the same family, they've got that linkage, even though there's not a kind of the same name plastered everywhere. So then some more examples of how that started to roll out across the branding into their signage and the wayfinding at Gloucester. Product and packaging, again, keeping it quite subtle. We wanted to very much avoid just kind of plastering the logo everywhere and give this sense of a kind of independent business. It was quite kind of subtle and intelligent with its branding. Into the interiors and applying that into the interior design with the kind of names for the different elements they offer, and then into the digital side and websites. So I think that's should we pause again there, Paul?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I know their story, and I've been to Tebay, which is probably the gold star 5-star service station in the whole of the UK. I mean, it's just beautiful, and the locations on a good day, the weather's great, and even on a bad day, it's great because the coffee's fantastic and everything about it is lovely. But they're quite innovative, aren't they? In terms of, you listen to the story of John and his sense of place in the history, you've kind of captured the past. But if you take COP26 at the moment and the whole sustainability agenda, their whole mantra, even back then, was low food miles, locally sourced, locally produced, locally delivered. So really kind of an innovative, as a business, innovative, forward-thinking, took a risk, the risk has paid off. And that's then fed into the story that you're telling through the brand and the brand positioning. So very much kind of their time, I think, is kind of what I would say. And it's really simple and really crisp the way it's been delivered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, John's a fascinating person, very forward thinking. When we spent time with him as part of kind of understanding the story, he was telling us all about kind of Scandinavian models of the economy and farming, and very forward thinking. One of his big things was, you go back to the 70s and Cumbria, and there wasn't as much tourism up there then, and some of the outer areas and farming communities and things were having some tough times, and he always saw the motorway as an opportunity because it would bring customers basically passing through that area. So he always saw the motorway service area as an opportunity to be a catalyst for economic growth in the area, because it would bring people and create a market where they could sell not just their produce from the farm, but other people who made, pottery and other products in the area, they could then sell those as well.
Yeah, so and it's a great concept, and it's obviously translated from eBay to Gloucester, so it does move. I think the other thing I'd say to you in terms of the place, having just done our Scottish family business road trip, it's incredible how many family businesses are so entrenched in their own community, and it is really about the place. You take Johnson's of Elgin or Walker's Shortbread in Speyside, and even a smaller family business on the island of Harris, Essence of Harris. It's all about Harris, the noise, the sea, the sand. So that sense of place, I know it's probably encapsulated by you, probably first and foremost through the Westland story, but it resonates all around the country, doesn't it? And probably all around the world.
Yes, yeah, and I think that the trick is then finding the relevance. That when not forgetting the customer and all this, like why should they care? Because it's very easy to get lost in like what matters to us as a business and what we're passionate about, but it's got to resonate with the customer. And I think that sense of place in the way Westmoreland deliver it really resonates with customers in a market that's so homogenized and lacking in sense of place, which is why they're so successful. I think you're right that lots of family businesses probably are quite intertwined in their communities and having a sense of place. But if you're selling a whiskey that's sat on a supermarket shelf in London or Hull or wherever, then it's how do you encapsulate the relevance of place to that customer who's looking at a selection of whiskies on a shelf. It's finding that way to make it relevant, really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It's easy just to say we're a Yorkshire business and stamp Yorkshire everywhere, or in Scotland, but it's more than that, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
The two case studies you presented so far both have very kind of strong. I mean, I know William at JW's. I know the Westman story and the Westman. They both resound around strong individuals. Does it help you in terms of defining the proposition and then delivering when there is somebody strong with strong views that you can encapsulate into what you're doing, or is it a broader thing? You talk to more than just the lead player. You talk to a whole range of people, and then you summarize the whole thing and then build from there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the story comes from kind of a broader selection of input than just that person. I think where that strong leadership, like Sarah Dunning or William, is really important, is that it's to actually do this and do this well requires a level of commitment and belief in driving it across the business and making sure it starts to ooze out of everything, and that it's a focal point for everything, and that it guides every decision. Because if you don't, and you do a bit, but it doesn't, you're not consistent with it, you don't drive it across everything, then it won't start to come across to customers. And I think when you've got that strong leader in a family business who you've helped them articulate something that they really believe in, that is something within them that they're passionate about, and you've helped them bottle that and communicate that and convey that, then I think that both of those individuals have been really crucial in terms of then really pushing that forward in their businesses and kind of driving it across them.
But I guess what I'm hearing, Rob, is it's got to be outward looking and forward facing. It's got to be out to the market for the customer experience. It's not about just rebranding the logos inside and the letterhead and everything else. It's about that whole customer journey, that customer experience, whether you're selling service station food or diesel rooms, or you're selling a bottle of whiskey, or you're a painter and decorator. It's all about the end user and them getting from you what you want, or what they want to get from you in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think strong brands are always about something more than a logo. The logo is only ever a reminder of a distinctive visual reminder of who that company is, that's recognizable. If it's a strong brand, then it's about the values and the ethos that sit behind that and what that logo comes to represent.
What are the biggest barriers you get? Do you get any resistance? I mean, resistance to change. Sometimes I guess if you're going down multi-generational, you've got a brand, you've got a logo, you've got a look, you've got a feel. There must at some point be that resistance to, you know what, it's done us well for this long, we don't need to change. It doesn't need to change. Like, what are some of the barriers that you get, and then how do you overcome them?
I mean, I think in that first instance, that can be a real challenge. And again, I think this is where, you know, strong leadership comes in. That, you know, I know in both these examples we've talked about with William and Sarah, you know, they had people around them saying, why are we doing this? Why are we kind of, you know, investing money in this, you know, but they had that kind of conviction to say, you know, it's important to do it, which is kind of what gets things going initially. And then you start to bring people on the journey with you as this starts to come to life. You know, often, you know, from sharing the film is often, you know, in both of these processes, that's one of the first things that starts to come out of the process. And as people start to see something like that, it then connects, and they're like, wow, you know, and they start to feel differently about their own business that they're working in, and it energizes them. And that's then how you start, as you then push forward and start to do more and more, and start to show more and more exciting things that are reflective of this vision, more people get engaged and interested and on board with it. You know, that back to the point I made at the start about what we call this a rocket launch program. You know, it's that energy that builds as you move forward. I think one of the challenges after that is then keeping it alive. You know, once you've been through the initial, you know, year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever of doing this, you then start, you know, sometimes within a business you get change. Well, you get change in all business, don't you? You know, new people come in, or even, you know, within the family, you know, future generations and things, you know, and they look at the business fresh and start to have their own ideas, and they want to have their own input and stuff. And I think, again, that's a leadership challenge in terms of, you know, it's not about this kind of stuff becoming a straitjacket that should never change. You know, businesses it needs to keep evolving and moving forward and getting refreshed, but you need to keep that thread running through it. Don't lose the thread, you know. And again, that's the leadership challenge in terms of how you navigate that, keep moving forward and evolving, but don't lose the thread.
It's good advice, actually, because it's not set in time just because it's been launched. That's not what it is. It's got to evolve, it's got to grow, the business is going to change, it's got to change and evolve with you. So the stretchability, I guess, is important. Do you have a third case study for us?
Yes, and this one's a shorter one, but I thought it might be interesting because it's a different type of business. So Vesti Holdings, as it is now, amazing business with amazing history, but primarily Vesti Holdings is a holding company. So it's not a customer facing brand in the way that JD Belize or Westmoreland are. It kind of sits in the background and owns other businesses who are in themselves kind of customer facing. So you can see here their group of businesses. So this kind of example doesn't have the same multitude of applications to pubs or service stations or that kind of thing, but it's much more about the internal vision and the kind of narrative and the values and the ethos. It's much more internally focused in terms of what sits behind it. So I'll show you the film we made for them to kind of encapsulate the purpose we helped them create, which is all around good ownership and around you know, being good owners of the businesses that they're kind of custodians of.
Okay.
So I'll show you this film.
I actually feel inspired by them. There were some great people who went before. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, great-great-uncle. What they did was absolutely incredible. When I was a child, I knew that our family had an incredible business and that our ancestors were the most amazing, pioneering and visionary people, an inspiration for future generations.
We find it very important that we have a history within the food industry and the food trading. You know, it's not every company that has been around for more than 150 years.
I trained in the business as a butcher and worked in a series of shops. I remember being in a shop one day and the shop manager had set up a shop for the day's trading. And when he was done, the area manager came along and said, "Why have you done it this way? Change it all around and do it that way." And I remember thinking, what a terrible waste of time that is. The shop manager and his staff should have been trusted to set up the shop in the right way.
There's definitely a can-do spirit. Our ability to complete and finish is legendary on the shop floor. That's just what we are built to do.
We have to be honest, we have to be approachable. It's important that we have that type of attitude to grow the business and to ensure that the staff are on the same page that we're on.
We are a people business. We stand or fall by the capabilities and the performance of our people, and engaging with them is the most enjoyable and exciting part of the business for me.
George and Robin come down, regular visits, talk to the staff. The staff see that as a very positive point, that the people at the very top are taking interest in what they're doing.
It's a humbling aspect that a huge array of people have deemed to come and work for us. They're here, and we've got a great responsibility to them. We're looking for leaders who've got the vision of where they want to take the business and a strong sense of ownership that enables them to drive the business more effectively. Hire the best, engage them, empower them with responsibility, and let them get on with it. It gives people incredible confidence. It's not about the short term. We are custodians. It's a question of what we can pass on. We have to use the past to our benefit, but not be bound by it. This is our moment. This is our chance to shine and leave our mark for the future.
So then a lot of the rollout work that with them, we changed the branding as well to create this this new identity inspired by family trees, creating this sense of kind of a family of businesses connected, and this kind of passing through generations and through time across the branding. And a big kind of focus of that was internally, so helps them with newspapers and internal kind of publications and all that kind of thing to tell the stories that kind of reflected this purpose and brought it to life day in, day out for people within the business. So that's the Vesti one. Position power calculator is a tool you can download on our website. So if you want for exploring this in more detail, that might be quite a useful thing. That allows you to kind of walk through the process, and it'll ask you various questions about your own brand in your own business, and help you kind of measure strengths and weaknesses and where you might focus in terms of developing your own brand if these kind of processes are something you want to explore in more detail.
Rob, that was brilliant, because you've taken two similar-ish businesses, and then one that's kind of a bit out there in terms of a group of businesses that are slightly unrelated in very many. There's a pensions company and a food company and a butcher's, but they use and I'm probably your biggest fan in a way, because they used the family tree and the genogram idea to pull them together. It was kind of almost like genius for me in terms of it shows the family business understanding at a different level. So I've loved all three. I think what the bigger picture, I guess, to take away for everybody is that actually you need to be authentic, and you need to be real, and you need to be honest with who you are, your why, your purpose, and what you're in business for. And I think all of those stories in different ways encapsulate that. So thank you for sharing your input and your experience, because it is people think branding and marketing is really easy and it's just a logo and you stick a word on a wall and it's all going to happen, but you take time to craft the brand for the future based on what you've seen before. So really powerful stuff, and yeah, really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure listening to you, and I look forward to some more stories. We will share all the information after the event, and there is a full summit section on the FBU website at familybusinessunited.com where you can see all of the sessions from the week and all the additional resources that we have. Rob will be joining us at future events, so you will be getting to see from and hear from him again in the future. But for now, Rob, just want to say thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your insight.
Thank you, Paul. My pleasure.
Thank you very much.